Hello, my name is John Grossman, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Forest History Association of Wisconsin. And I'd like to welcome you to the 8th session of our fall webinar series. This afternoon's talk is titled Heritage and Success of Wisconsin's School Forest Program, offered by our co-presenters, Gretchen Marshall and Steve Schmidt. Gretchen is the Leaf Forestry and Outdoor Education Specialist at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. She's been a member of the LEAF team since 2008, currently coordinates Wisconsin's School Forest Program, and works with educators to enhance the outdoor learning opportunities for students. She has a BS in Environmental Education and Interpretation and Biology Education with teacher certification, and an MS in Environmental Education from the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. Gretchen enjoys traveling with family and outdoor recreation. Steve Schmidt is an outreach specialist with UW Stevens Point. He joined LEAF in 2018 as an associate outreach specialist. His work supports the School Forest Program in particular with other LEAF projects related to the experiences in science education. He has a BS in Environmental Science and Biology with a chemistry minor from Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas, and an MS in Natural Resources Fisheries from UW Stevens Point. Steve has taught pre-K college science for over 20 years, including after-school science and school forest programs. His favorite activities are spending time with his family, especially in Washington Island, Door County, Wisconsin, and bird hunting with his retriever, Griffin, and exploring the waters of Lake Michigan from a kayak or an underwater remotely operated vehicle. As I now hand off to our presenters, please consider a couple of issues to aid the success of this webinar. First, note questions you may have for the presenter during the presentation. Seriously take note to pose them via the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. In the course of this offering, we're expecting to stop sort of midway and invite some reaction to some issues that are being posted. So anticipate that. If you're new to Zoom and have challenges navigating the system, you can pose a question to get help from our facilitator, also using that chat feature. And finally, please be aware that tomorrow you will receive a follow-up email from Zoom with a link to an evaluation form on a SurveyMonkey. Please reflect on today's presentation. This presentation, give it some time to digest, and then take time to complete the form for us tomorrow. Please anticipate that. As I transition now to offer to the presenters, I'm reminded, with this group especially, and with who we anticipate is in our audience, that forest ecosystem management is defined as decision-making at a range of scales, both temporal and spatial, time and space. Think about that. As a forest history organization, of course, we have that issue of time before us, dealing with things that grow for a long time before they're utilized. A guy named Leopold was heard to remark that everything is connected to everything else. Another guy named Chief Seattle, reminded us that all of life is connected. When you hear the stories being told this afternoon, think about that, how we've evolved to become who we are at this point in time and the things that took time to mature. Along with you, we now look forward to this afternoon's presentation.
I take it we're a go?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you so much for having Steve and I here this afternoon. As John said, my name is Gretchen Marshall, and I work within LEAF, Wisconsin's K-12 forestry education, as a school forest specialist. And a little bit more about my background that kind of ties in nicely today is that I never knew as a high school student in Wisconsin that an opportunity like this would exist for me someday. I was a part of a fantastic school district that had a school forest. We started going to the school forest when we were young. In high school, we were able to become facilitators and teachers of younger students out at the school forest. And then now here we are today with an actual full-time school forest position in the state, still able to help others. So I think that's really neat. Steve, a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. When I came to LEAF in 2018, my job was to organize a project to digitize the school forest files. As I dug into the files, it became apparent to me that there's a rich history to be told about Wisconsin's school forest program. And I soon realized we were at the 90-year mark in 2018, and it was time to start planning for our 100th anniversary. After all, these things take time. This presentation is our current experiences looking back at the heritage and success of Wisconsin's school forest program with an eye to that 100-year anniversary coming up in 2028. We know there are gaps and there may be inaccuracies in our presentation. We hope you will jot down any of those details you can help us straighten out and share them with us via email. Please help us out with this important project. Welcome and thank you for attending. Although my master's is in fisheries and water resources, forestry has always been there to lend more context to my schooling. As John mentioned earlier, my undergraduate was from Stephen F. Austin State University. That was in their College of Forestry. My master's thesis was a survey of lakes on the Menominee Indian Reservation, and I'll assume that you know about the tribe's world-class forestry management. I first connected with LEAF as a high school science teacher 13 years ago, of 13 years, in which I registered a school forest and still help consult with that school forest today. I'd like to recognize that the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point occupies the lands of the Ho-Chunk and Menominee people. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral land that you're on. Think about what that means to you. We're all on the sacred lands of First Nations. This is important to me because I feel a responsibility to the way the earth takes care of us and how we should do the same as have Native peoples for millennia. I did my graduate research on the reservation and honor the way the Menominee people care for the earth. Thank you.
I wanted to take a moment to just share a little bit more with you about LEAF. And for those of you who aren't aware of what the LEAF program is and what we do in the state, school forests are now housed under the LEAF program. So LEAF connects formal and non-formal educators in Wisconsin with quality forestry education materials. It's our mission to help get materials, resources, lessons, teachers in the state so they can then take their students out into the forest to teach Wisconsin forest and forestry. We're a partnership program between the Wisconsin Division of Forestry and the Wisconsin Center for Environmental Education here in the College of Natural Resources on the UW-Stevens Point campus. And LEAF has been around for quite a while now. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we've been able to have a great impact over time reaching students. We now have a total of 416 school forests in the state, and we've been able to reach over 6,000 teachers with our materials. How do we do that? So through a variety of different ways, LEAF offers professional development for educators. Normally, we like to do those things face-to-face, but in times like these virtual sessions are how we're still continuing to reach educators and stakeholders and interested parties in the state with forestry information. Curriculum materials, we have lessons available on our website that are free for anyone to use. Hands-on forestry education kits. So instead of just having the lessons, we try to give you the tools that you need to implement those lessons. And then we provide support for school forests, like what you're going to hear about today, and also Project Learning Tree in Wisconsin. And if you're ever curious, the website is there, www.leafprogram.org. You can find our contact information and more information about the program there. Steve, next slide. So I thought before we went back in time and took a look at that historical context, let's take and make sure that we have a really good solid foundation about what a school forest actually is. Because we do have schools in the state that say that they have a school forest, but haven't actually registered through the program. And in essence, we want you out there doing forestry. So that's fantastic, but it does deviate a little bit from the actual true Wisconsin School Forest Program. So to be a school forest, your land needs to be registered through the State Community Forest Program, and it needs to be owned or under the control of a school. And the two major emphases of a school forest is that it's used for environmental education and natural resource management. So we want, in essence, both of those two things to be happening on a school forest, and they are around school forests all over the state. The other thing, that's fine, Steve, you can stay there. The other thing that I think is important to mention is that school forests only need to be 1 acre in size right now, and that's going to come into play a little bit later. So school forests are registered under a Wisconsin state statute. So one of the really neat, unique things about Wisconsin in our school forest program is that we have a state statute, the community forest law, that, as you can see here, allows any city, town, village, or school district to acquire land, use it for forestry and education, and be included in these schools' intentions. There's a little bit more to it, and we can go into, if you have questions later, a little bit more in depth, but that's just a really neat thing that Wisconsin has that many other states don't have. So a lot of you may know that Laona School District is given credit for being the first school forest in the nation. They have the placard outside on Highway 8, right at the entrance to the school forest. It's a really neat piece of property. We're going to talk a little bit more about maybe some of the controversy surrounding that a little bit later, but as Steve starts to talk in the next few slides about really influential people in the school forest program, I think it's really important to note why school forests and why these ideas got started. Why was there a need to think about a school forest program? And if you think back to that point in time, we're talking the 1920s. We had the logging and lumberjack era go through. We have this land trying to be farmed, cut over, slashed, burned, and trying to be used as farmland, and not always being many times not being very successful. And so a lot of our first school forest properties ended up as tax delinquent land, and then reverted back to counties, municipalities, and then the school districts. This Laona School Forest had part of that history in its former use of the land, but then this land was actually purchased for the Laona School District. And then Steve, if you can go to the next slide. I also just wanted to point out that this school forest is still alive, well, and thriving today. You can see this in the photos here. We have a picture of a recent harvest that was just done. So as those trees were planted way back in the late 20s, early 30s, we've still been able to continue that cycle of planting and harvest. And so this harvest was done, I believe, in 2014. And then you can see the other picture where the students from a different grade level were out there planting trees again after this harvest. And I believe that was in 2016. So just a really great example of how even our very first recognized school forest in the state continues that essence of both natural resource management and education for the students. Steve? So with that, transition over to Steve, and he's going to kind of lead us through many influential people that helped the school forest become the great success that it still is today.
So the first person I'd like to talk about is H.L. Russell. He was the Dean of the College of Agriculture at UW-Madison in the early 1900s. He's credited with the inspiration to start the school forest program after a trip to Australia. On that trip, he was inspired when he visited schools in which children were planting trees. Thinking about the state of land after the cutover in Wisconsin, he brought that idea home, where he asked educator Wakeland McNeil to help make it happen. Here's a picture of the Laona dedication. It's a bit difficult to tell, but I think this is Russell in the dark overcoat. A lifelong educator with training in forestry, Wakeland McNeil was the perfect partner for this endeavor. He became well respected and known throughout the state for leading the 4-H program and later for his radio show, A Field with Ranger Mac. I found a website dedicated to McNeil with many recordings and original show notes. See the linked text in the PDF that will be sent to you following the presentation. They're really fun to listen to. Most of the trees he helped distribute were planted by Wisconsin students on school grounds and forests, and you can see here that was over 1 million of them. He helped to secure the Upham family's donation of land for the Upham Woods near Wisconsin Dells. And in 1995, he was inducted into the Wisconsin Forestry Hall of Fame. I love this picture because you can really see how captivated the students were and how he got right down to their level. Fred Trenk, UW Extension forester, also supervised the planting of tens of thousands of trees and also developed a mechanical tree planter. Russell and McNeil started the school forest program, but Fred Trenk really was the first administrator of the program. He became known as the father of school forests for really growing the program by registering so many new forests and also for developing the first school forest handbook in 1959. During Trenk's work with the school forest program, a philosophical switch began to take place from school forests as simply places for students to help to reforest fallow land to more holistic ecological education. Trenk's work was recognized by inductions into both the Wisconsin Forestry and Conservation Halls of Fame. The photo of Trenk here shows how enthusiastic an educator he was. And the other photo is Waukesha High School students planting trees, and that photo was taken by Trenk himself. Just a few other interesting pictures from that era. This is a 1956 photo of forester Bill Seibold with high school students at the Boston School Forest in Stevens Point, and that photo was by Staber Reese. And here's a demonstration of a backpack pump sprayer to Wapaka High School students in 1957. This photo was by Dean Tvet. And then another planting tree photo, 1958. This is school children planting trees on the southern unit of the Kettle Moraine State Forest. So you can see students were really getting interested in these kinds of things and certainly helping with these projects. Here's the cover and first few pages of Trenk's handbook. On the first page is a school forest covenant, which students recited to provide some focus to their mission. There's also a foreword written by Wakeland McNeil, and I'll read a little bit of that foreword to you. Attitudes are not born, they are acquired by experiences. Young people have enthusiasm, idealism, and willingness to take hold of a problem under leadership that confidently points the way. Since the school forest is not a short-time activity, and the turnover in teaching staffs, as well as in the student bodies, is very rapid, a special leadership is required which looks into a future. A leadership is required which radiates courage and conviction to others, that the work of each generation of students may be enduring. The successful school forest, in return, becomes a living and lasting testimonial to that vision and leadership which brought it forth. So just a little interesting forward there, but looking deeper into the handbook, there's major sections that include accessibility of the school forest to all students, qualities of a school forest, how to acquire land, mapping and forest management, nature trails and signs, documenting progress, nature clubs, and a sample plan of development. This really gave guidance to forests all across the state that were starting to crop up. And by 1959, when this was written, or 1960, there were quite a few school forests already.
And that handbook was considered so important and useful that another one was recreated in 2001 and by Wafria and Weeb. Wafria is an organization no longer in existence, but it was the Wisconsin Forest Resources Education Alliance. And then Weeb was a granting organization. And so through that process, they were able to update and create a modernized version of a school forest handbook, and LEAF continues to update and use the handbook as well with educators throughout the state. And as I was comparing that handbook that Steve just showed you to the one that we have now, there are so many things that are still the same today that were important back then about getting your forest land and how to organize and the educational opportunities that exist there, and maps and how important those are. So it's really neat to see that transition still continue through the years.
Our next school forest administrator, Ted Peterson, was a UW Extension forester for about 40 years. During his career, he emphasized that all natural resources management should be promoted at school forests. Peterson was inducted into the Wisconsin Forestry Hall of Fame during the Wisconsin SAF meeting in 2019. I wished I would have thought to meet him there, but I missed that part of the conference and only heard of the induction following the event. Gratefully, last month, I had a wonderful conversation with Ted. He shared how much he enjoyed the work. He remembered especially working with Marinette and Eau Claire School Forests and how great the programs were and still are at Merrill and Wausau School Forests. In fact, he asked me to send him some information about those two forests, which I did. Perhaps the most touching story he shared with me was of traveling to Laona with Wakeland McNeil in 1958 to rededicate the school forest on its 30th anniversary. I could hear the respect in Ted's voice as he spoke about McNeil, who sadly passed away shortly after that trip. I'd like to share with you, building on the work of Fred Trank and those before him, Peterson fully embraced the shift to a more holistic approach to forestry education, illustrated in a correspondence with the Princeton School's superintendent. So I'll read that in case it's too small for your screen, but it really illustrates this point that school forests were used for different things than simply planting trees. Dear Mr. Peterson, our game manager has talked about wetland management. Could we register the 40 acres of this tract as wetland management instead of reforestation? Or isn't there a division for wetland management? Dear Mr. Calhoun, I have your application for registration of the 100 acres known as Pennsylvania number 2. Reference is made to the 40 acres involved in this tract, which is classified as wetland. There is no registration for wetland in the community forest program. This does not imply that all land registered must be reforested regardless of site. On the contrary, school forest land, which involves an area unsuitable for trees, should be managed for an alternative, better use. As you recall from our discussions at the school forest workshop at Wisconsin Dells several years ago, emphasis was given to a variety of land uses on school forest area. This is important from an educational as well as practical standpoint. Wetlands form an integral part of the forest landscape. What better opportunity is there to show interrelationships of natural resources? There is nothing wrong with managing the 40 acres of wetland for game within the Pennsylvania 2 school forest. It will, however, be registered as a school forest unit. I'm returning one copy of the application for registration for your files. Very sincerely, T.A. Peterson, Extension Forester. Our next forester, based on what I've read, it seems that sometime in the late 60s or early 70s, Trees for Tomorrow ran the school forest program. Trees was started in 1944 by paper industry executives as a way to build sustainability into their industry by encouraging the planting of trees. In the second year of its existence, education was included in its mission. So there are likely current or former Trees for Tomorrow staff who may know more about the TFT connection to school forests. If you're out there and hear this, please contact us and let us know. Bill Sylvester must have been an integral part of both missions, and his name appears on quite a few school forest documents, especially in the 1970s. It's possible that Bill brought the school forest program to UWSP when he started as an associate professor there in the 70s. According to his obituary, his most lasting contribution to the world of conservation education was the brokering of the donation of land from the Valier family to provide for the current day Treehaven Environmental Center in Tomahawk. Treehaven is essentially a school forest for UWSP, if you think about it. Subsequently, a lecture hall at Treehaven was named after him, and after his retirement, he received the Golden Membership Award from the Society of American Foresters and was inducted into the Wisconsin Forestry Hall of Fame. So here's a letter that Bill wrote. Even in 1974, there was a debate about which Forest County school forest was actually first. Bill Sylvester, I think, had a wise reply. So he's writing to Mr. Scott R. Hendrickson, Agricultural and Resource Agent, Forest in Florence, and I think that should be county, but I'm not sure. Dear Scott, to the best of our knowledge, the Crandon, Wabeno, and Laona school forests were set up at the same time. They were each dedicated in the same day and 1/2 period of time. Crandon, then Laona, followed by Wabeno. Thus, for all intent, it's a draw as to who, if any, was first. Later, it was shown that Laona was first, hence they have the sign, I thought I'd share the letter though, just to illustrate that almost 50 years after these forests became registered, there was still some debate. It also illustrates how important record keeping and clear communication is to our job. Between Trank, Peterson, and Sylvester, there appears to be no distinct dates noting the beginning and ending of their work with school forests, other than their retirement, which we know at that point they probably didn't do school forest work afterwards, but it was part of their jobs along with much other work. The picture becomes a little clearer in recent times.
So one of the things that Steve just mentioned is the existence of these historical documents. And we are so fortunate to have them still here in the school forest files. And you saw the letters that Steve showed. I just wanted to give you some other examples of historical documents that are in school forest files. So if you're unaware, every single school forest in the state has its own file folder in the office here. And as Steve mentioned, we've been working on scanning, digitizing these hard paper copies into electronic copies, which has been wonderful to have during this time. But they're also really important pieces of paper, not just for their historical value, but because we still reference them all the time. Actually, today I found a 1950s document to a school forest that is kind of revitalizing itself, and I was able to send them official 1950 paperwork for historical aspects of their school forest program and kind of how it got its start. And it did. It was the Trees for Tomorrow letterhead from Merrill. So anyway, just some examples though. So on the right side is an application of a school forest. I believe it was the Marinette School Forest, which is one of them, I should say. They have multiple parcels, and that dates back to 1953. And then you can see an old management plan, an original management plan that was created by Bill Sylvester for the Prentice School Forest. So it's just really neat that we still have these documents, and they are referenced, and they have really tied school forests together over the decades. And it's we're still trying to keep a really good, not only electronic, but paper copy of things in existence, so that 20 years from now, when Steve and I might not be here and somebody has a question, you can look back and find an answer.
And just one thing I notice here that I believe, if I'm seeing this correctly, it says January 1948. So I didn't realize Bill Sylvester worked with school forests quite that early. So digging into these files reveals something just about every time. One more piece of the puzzle. And the next slide. So then where did we go from there? So school forests continue to transition between a few different entities and programs. And in the 80s and the 90s, they transitioned back into the DNR, and a lot of work was done there by some very influential people. And then in the late 90s, there started to be discussion in the very early 2000 year about how to create a statewide forestry education program for Wisconsin, because we knew that our students were getting great information about global forests, about rainforest destruction, so on and so forth. But what resources and tools were out there to help our teachers teach about our own forests here in Wisconsin? So the DNR created LEAF in 2001. And then in 2003, the statewide school forest program came under LEAF. So we're definitely, as I initially stated, we're a partnership program with the DNR Division of Forestry, and school forests are still housed within the DNR Division of Forestry. All of the official registration paperwork is contained there. But it also allowed for this full-time position, of which part of my job goes to Steve. Other LEAF staff members also play a part in that. But we are able to provide at least a full-time position support to help school forests in the state. And I know those bullet points underneath there are really tiny. I don't expect you to read them, but what are some of the services that school forests still get in the state is they get that guidance and consultation in developing school forest programs and helping with some of that foundational planning. We connect school forests with their DNR foresters that would service their area, because that's the other part of that partnership program is they get that forest management assistance
in creating sustainably used forests with a DNR forester. We have a networking program. Once our schools are signed up to be a school forest, they receive pertinent school forest information. And if they have a question, we can connect them with other school forest educators that are doing similar things or might be able to help them out. Professional development, again, if they aren't sure how to use their school forest or what to do with students out there, we can step in and help provide professional development opportunities for them. And then general information about, are there grants available? Are there funding resources available? I want to create a trail. I need to get tools and supplies to use in my forest. Where can we follow up and get some of that information or those monies from to make those kind of things happen? So we've tried to carry suit with all those influential leaders in the past to still really provide support for our school forests in the state to make them successful. All right, so one of the things that we took a really close look at in preparing for today, and I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but we said that the school forest program started back in the 1920s with the first registrations in the later part of that decade, obviously. And how did our school forest registrations grow, I should say? How did our program grow over the decades to where we are now? And as we go through, Steve's going to lead us through a series of slides in a few minutes, and you're going to see the chart, the graph on the left for each decade and the number of school forests that were registered during that decade that still exist today. And I just want to make that point because we have had many school forests registered over the years that have been removed from the program because of various reasons. They might have been sold, schools consolidated and they didn't take the land with them. And so there's multitude of different reasons why we no longer have certain school forests registered in the system. But the ones that we do have in the system, we went back and looked at the years that they were registered by decade. And I just want you to watch how things progress to where we are now. And this is one of those points where if you have some thoughts that you want to put in the chat, I'm curious to know if you can guess why during certain decades we had a great number of registrations and other decades there weren't quite so many. So with that, feel free to add your thoughts and things to the chat. And at the end, we'll kind of go through and talk through some of those things. So Steve, if you'd like to get it rolling.
Okay, so everybody can see the 20s. Just to clarify one more thing, and I think this is true, Gretchen, you can clarify with it or not, but this is not additive. This is like how many were actually registered in just that decade. So in the 50s, there were 111 registered in just that decade. That's not where our total number was. It was 111 plus everything before it.
Correct.
Okay. And that becomes clear here when the numbers drop off quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Also keep your eye on the map and where we started with school forests and now we're kind of expanding to the rest of the state and where we really start to populate things now. All right. Any thoughts as you take a look at that that graph and the distribution over the state, why we would see such an incredible increase in the even 40s, 1950s. We kind of saw things decrease a little bit and then again rise again in the 2000s to the decade that we're in now. Go ahead and put some thoughts in the chat. While you're doing that, I'm going to go back because Elizabeth had a question in the chat, and she noticed that in the old high school photos, only boys are present. Were these boys in a technical program where girls did not enroll? Or at what point did the high school forestry class go co-ed? Steve, any thoughts on that?
No, that's a great question. And when I was looking at pictures to include in this, I showed a bunch of them to the LEAF staff, and that comment came up as well. And so we tried to find some pictures for, and I agreed with it. I could notice that right away. We found some pictures of tree plantings where there were not only girls, there were also people of color in some of those. But you know, I got the pictures from, most of those pictures were from the University of Wisconsin digital collection, which is really fascinating if you haven't been to that website, for all kinds of natural resources type photos. But there just weren't a whole lot of pictures of school forests. And so, you know, we did what we could, I guess. But I would assume that there, you know, when I read actually, when you listen to some of the Ranger Mac broadcasts, or when you read some of the files, oftentimes, if you think about back to the 50s and 60s or 40s, there was definitely a different set of rules, I guess, that people thought the way society worked back then. And often it was talking about, you know, promoting jobs for boys when they become men. You know, there wasn't a whole lot mentioned. So I think, and with the naming of our new state forester, I think we've made a lot of progress. And hopefully that's taking place in the schools as well. I know from my experience as a school forest coordinator that we certainly had boys and girls in our natural resources classes. And so it wasn't just an interest by the boys. I know that was kind of a long-winded answer, but.
That's okay. I think so. I don't think there's any one correct answer, but I think Tom and John also added some really good thoughts to the chat. And Tom mentioned that the conservation movement of the 50s and 60s coinciding with Aldo Leopold in a Sand County Almanac, and John with the end of World War II seemed to have been a prompt, also the organized effort to advance sustainable forestry education in the 50s. In the issue of leaders and leadership, and that's very, very true. I think there's multiple factors at play here. The other thing that I want to mention into this mix is the types of conservation education legislation that was being introduced at the time. And so in 1927, we had legislation that allowed these school districts to own land for forestry purposes. And then if you go into the 1930s and 1935, we had legislation presented that mandated conservation education be taught in all high schools, vocational schools, and colleges and universities. And that's why I'm wondering too, maybe if some of those pictures were from that time era where, again, we didn't have as many females in some of those classes, and especially if it was a relatively new thing. So that was 1935. And then once we get to 1949, we revised those Wisconsin state statutes to allow these school forest programs to receive free seedlings or planting stock, it was called at the time, and forester services. So I think if you combine the things that had been mentioned in the chat with the legislation, and then just the influential ability of these leaders and the different ways that they were able to promote and talk about conservation education, and that these school forests were seen as fantastic outdoor laboratories to host conservation education for our schools. I think all combines together. Samara also mentioned that she's seen a couple of homemaker forests in Wisconsin. Are those connected to school forests? I do not know. That's a great question. That's a really good question.
We have a script in our files, and I just typed this into the chat from
Okay.
a radio show that was called the Homemakers Radio Show or something like that. I don't quite remember, but I remember reading it, and it featured school forests. And so there may be some interest in that. And I'm happy to share that with people at some point when I get this information out to Tom to send to everyone.
Certainly. Good. Anyway, I just think it's fascinating information. And like I said, I know that there's forests that school forest registrations that we've lost along the way, but it's just fascinating to me to see the ones that have endured throughout this time.
So why did the number pop back up there?
My thinking is that we really started to focus again on environmental education. We've had a real big focus on sustainability and outdoor education through the years. And then sometimes I wonder if it's, again, just having a dedicated program that's able to assist people. One of the best parts of my job is when people say, thank you for taking the time out of your day to do this. I get to happily say, it's my job. I'm here to help. And so again, I think all of that comes into play. And I always say, school forests are a tried and true program. That's one of the great things. We've had decades to get it right. And we're really at a point right now where it's working well with school districts. So I think there's lots of factors still, but yeah, it's kind of neat to see. The other thing is that I mentioned at the beginning that to be a school forest, you only need to be 1 acre in size now. The acreage requirement changed over the years as well, and you used to have to be, I believe it was 25 acres of strictly forest property. And then I do believe that decreased slightly over the years. But now we do look at things at much more from an ecosystem approach. We obviously still need to have the forest as that main component, but we can also register a school forest, that has a pond on it, a prairie on it, so on and so forth. And now that school forests only need to be 1 acre in size, our smallest is 1 acre in size, but that's allowing and has really opened the door, which maybe you saw at the end of that mapping progression there with the dots, to allow suburban and urban school forest parcels to be registered as well. So now students can just walk right outside their school doors and be in the school forest instead of taking a bus 8, 10, sometimes up to 30 miles away to get to their school forest property.
And I noticed in the chat, John paid Leaf a compliment by saying Leaf came about in 2001. I also have, in my mind, I think also the addition of technology, communication goes so much faster these days. And I think just all the newsletters that we put out and the PR that moves so much faster also communicates those opportunities to people as well. So probably technology, probably Leaf, probably the smaller school forest restriction.
Lots of factors, but it's neat to see, and let's keep them growing. So I also did not want to leave out, we've been talking a lot about influential leaders that made a difference in the state for the school forest program, a little bit more on the higher level management of the program, or the ability to bring it out to the masses. But I don't want us to forget about those individuals at all of their local school forests that are doing the hard on the ground work to actually implement the program, because we can be here to help, but unless they're the ones doing the hard work on the ground, it's just not going to be successful. So there are way too many great school forest coordinators at those individual local school districts to list, and I would never want to forgetfully leave someone off the list. But I wanted to show you just some pictures about how diverse our school forest program is. Like I said, I had the fantastic opportunity to grow up in a school district that had a school forest. And then I worked at a few other school forests before coming to this position. And one of the things that still amazes me to this day is that how different every single school forest is. So while we still have that premise of what the essence of a school forest has to be and used for, when those school forests, though, are implemented by their districts, it is completely up to the district how they choose to use them under those guidelines. And so we have school districts that do amazing living history things, school districts that use their water resources and really teach about wildlife and recreation, school districts that teach our students about the importance of Wisconsin's wood products directly from the forest by harvesting a tree, milling it, and looking at the boards right then and there in the same day. Maple sugar production, using our school forests all throughout the different times of the year, and also for all of the different content that we learn in school. So I would say we can use a school forest to learn about forestry and or to learn about all of the other subjects as well. So we have foreign language, we have music, we have FIAD, we have all of the different subjects being taught at school forests in the state. And one of the other things I think that history has taught us about school forests over the years is that it can't just be one teacher, enthusiastic, passionate, and driving, or I should say being the sole and only person doing school forest work in their district. What we're really starting to find is that, and Steve's going to talk about some examples of this in a minute, but you know, we have had school forests that are just doing great, fantastic things. And then that teacher leaves, they retire, they move on, they go or elsewhere, and then the school forest program kind of dips off in that district. And then we hope later on another teacher or interested person comes and revitalizes that school forest program. The approach that we're really trying to use now is much more of a teamwork approach or a committee approach, so that there's just a clear transition if one staff member leaves and is influential in the program, that others can pick up and carry that on. So a few things that we are really working and striving to change, but at the same time, just knowing that you can go to one school forest one day, a different school forest, and you might see completely different things happening. And I noticed that there was a question that just came in the chat. Oh, sorry, it's not Elizabeth asking the questions. I apologize before. But the question is, where can I obtain a list of school forests open to the public? And then another question, do other Great Lakes states have a school forest system? So your first question about school forests being open to the public, we have some of that information, but not all of that information, because not all school forests are open. I would say your best bet right now would be, if there is a school forest you are looking to visit, contact that school district and find out if you have permission to go there. Steve had started to do some work and some articles that he has written for the WOA magazine. And so we know of some of them, but we don't have a list of all school forests that are open to the public. And that also can vary at different times of the year as well. And the other question about Great Lakes states having a school forest system, both Michigan and Minnesota have school forest programs. They are run slightly different than ours, but they do also have very active school forests as well. And beyond that, heading out further east, I'm not quite sure of the ones along the Great Lakes, but definitely surrounding Wisconsin, both Michigan and Minnesota do. Steve, would you like to tell us a little bit about some awards?
Sure. Yep. And I think we mentioned it, but Wisconsin was the first school forest program. And so we've been around, and we do communicate with those other programs as well.
And Stephen, just so you know, we're at about 250 right now.
Each year since 2004, LEAF has put out the call for nominations for the Wisconsin School Forest Award. The award recognizes the leadership, work, and dedication of teachers, administrators, students, community members, and resource professionals at one or several registered school forests Here are the DNR professionals who have won the award. Foresters and other resource professionals are crucial collaborators in a successful school forest. And as Gretchen has already mentioned, nominations will be open in December through January, so please consider nominating a deserving individual or group. Hello, Leaf, which app should I use? Leaf is excited to share a new map tool we've developed to easily locate and learn basic information about each school forest. The map was created by recent UWSP graduate Michael Mills. The tool was developed from our ideas to give easy access to descriptions of all the registered school forests, kind of like a field guide online. We also wanted to map their locations so that users could easily locate where the forests are and their general boundaries. We had hoped to get something out before the 100th anniversary, but the stars aligned sooner and we were able to pull Michael into Leaf for several months just recently. So I'll briefly demonstrate the tool, but please check it out on your own to see where all the school forests are in your neck of the woods. So let's see. Okay, can everyone see that, or can you see that? Okay, good. So here is the interactive map, and it's nice because you can see it's divided into counties, and you can zoom in with the zoom button over here. We're going to zoom into the biggest school forest in the state, which happens to be in Merrill, which is the Nels P. Evu Memorial Forest. And so when you zoom in, you can get pretty far in. When you click on the school forest, and you don't have to be this far in to click on it, it gives you basic information such as the name, the county, the school district, the GIS acres and the registered acres, the year registered on site, whether it's on the school site or not. In this case, no, it does have surface water, and if it's a public or private school, and then of course the GPS coordinates as well. So for each school forest in the state, we have that. It is a learning curve for Gretchen and myself. So there are a few new school forests that may not be on there yet. And so we're learning how to use the GIS programming in ArcGIS and Esri. But the other cool thing about this that I want to share with you are a couple layers. You can look at the major watershed layers and the hydrologic units, the subbasins as well. So that's kind of nice to be able to see the outline of the watershed that your school forest is in. And you can also look at topographic map view as well. And if you scroll in, you can get, I believe, like 30-minute marks. So anyway, wanted to share that quickly so that, and that's just available on the LEAF website. So just look up UWSP LEAF school forest map and you'll be able to find it pretty easily. To summarize, the successes and growth of the school forest program has rested on many individuals, but the ultimate future depends on collaboration. I want to share a few lines from Ted Peterson's 1959 publication, which holds true today. So here's what his publication looked like. The fundamental purpose of establishing school forest is more than just securing attractive land, registering it, and planting trees furnished free by the Conservation Department. Cooperative community participation is a prerequisite to continued success and usefulness of school forests. Unfortunately, there are many tracts now on the Community Forest Register that are no more than legal descriptions of land. These school forest programs ceased with the passing of an early spirited leader. To ensure effective continuity, the responsibility for developing and maintaining an active school forest program should not rest with one individual, but rather with a joint school and community committee. As an outdoor laboratory, the school forest offers an opportunity to develop an understanding of nature's community and the interrelationships of all natural resources. This understanding is requisite to intelligent management of the land. It was in the past and it will be in the future. So a case study that I'd like to quickly share with you, and when you get this PDF, you can click on the video of it. There was a school forest award that was just awarded in Sevastopol, and that school forest got started with Carl Schultz, who was the Sevastopol superintendent, and Mike Madden, who was an elementary teacher at the time. And this was in 1968. They got marginal farmland, and it became the Pioneer Ecological Reserve. So this is in Door County. During the past decade or so, there was not much activity at the forest. Fast forward to 3 or 4 years ago, and a team of teachers led by one of this year's school forest winners, Brenda Tank, and her colleague Katie Gruters, who nominated her, they've begun planning and implementing programming in which students have once again started to use the forest as an outdoor lab. So if you want to be inspired, I encourage you to watch this video. There's not time in our presentation to share it right now. It's about 15 minutes long. But again, if you know someone deserving of a school forest award, please consider nominating them or nudging them in the right direction. So there's Brooke on the right and Katie on the left. So as mentioned in the beginning of the talk, we will continue to solidify our understanding of the school forest history. We clearly don't have a handle on exact years and office location of the school forest program. We know it was housed in Madison, and we know it moved around and various agencies ran it, but we'll work on shoring this up. So if you have any ideas, again, please send those our way. And finally, keep 2028 on your radar for the 100th anniversary of the school forest program. Perhaps a way to get involved is to find a school forest near you and offer to volunteer your time. And some of them are public, and you can hike around on them and enjoy another place in nature that maybe you haven't been before.
All right.
So I just want to reiterate that our school forests are rooted in history. It's fantastic that we have this opportunity and the legacy that we do, and the past has shaped the present, but the essence of the school forest idea is alive and well today, and you can see it all around the state. And if you ever want to know more or learn more or need information about specific school forests, feel free to contact us. So Steve and I are always here if you have questions about this or about school forests in your area or just school forests in general. Don't hesitate to contact us. We more than welcome questions. So with that, that's what we have for you today.
Tom has a question in the chat.
Go for it.
Do school forests qualify for stewardship funding to purchase lands? I see many were donated. That's great too. Gretchen, do you?
No, right now, not that I'm aware of.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, most of our school forest lands are either now somehow land that school districts are able to acquire, land that school districts had that they didn't have registered in a program previously that are now aware of it and interested in doing so, or land that is purchased by someone else, but it has to be given to the school district. So we cannot enroll private land as a school forest. It literally has to be land purchased and either deeded over to a school district that under control or owned by a school district. That qualifier does also allow the municipality land. So we can register a school forest that might be owned by a city, town, or village, as long as there is a land use agreement in effect that gives that municipality gives the school district the control to use it as a school forest property.
We had another question about the Cumberland School Forest, and I think I'm going in the right place. You can help me out, Gretchen. There it is.
There we go. One thing that we should point out with using the map feature is if you use the search bar on the map, you have to actually type in the name of the forest, not necessarily the school district. So that's also a little, you have to actually know the name that the school forest was registered under. So like what Steve showed you, it wasn't the Merrill School Forest, it was the Nels P. Avenue Forest. So just sometimes that trips people up a little bit in searching. Cumberland has, yes, a beautiful forest. Trust fund money has been used to purchase the school forest lands to improve them. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know that. Sorry. I know that there's a lot of work being done over there right now, but I don't know those specific details. Great questions today. Anything else?
There was a comment earlier when you were talking about the papers, and it says And these papers are important because they're literally pieces of the forest that have been replanted. I thought that was a very interesting comment. And I just wanted to say how important it is to digitize paper because it does not last forever. Having done some research at various historical societies, you find paper in all different conditions and readability even. So I applaud you for taking the initiative to preserve those documents and digitize them because they will not last forever.
Very true.
At the end of our questions, Tom?
I'm just doing a quick check here. I always have to check the Q&A. Some people drop stuff in there. That is good. I think we are, John.
Okay. Well, once again, I think we've had a program that as a recorded resource is going to get a lot of use, a lot of visits. The expectation you should have is that all of the webinar series programs have been recorded and will be available for viewing via links at our website. So be in touch with what we have there. That's Forest History Association of Wisconsin, WI.com. Take a look at what we have there, and especially as you may browse that, there's an invitation there to send us a message, offer a question or offer advice. We truly welcome that. You know, when I opened the program, I cited a couple guys, Leopold and Seattle. Aldo Leopold famously offers that everything is connected to everything else. Sometimes thought about as the prompt to get us moving toward forest ecosystem management, not simply forest management. But Seattle, many years before him, offered the cosmic view that all of life is connected, and truly it is. When you think about managing forest ecosystems across time and space, across landscapes and miles and years, there's a poignant reality there. The fact is that I've spent my career as a forester, often in settings managing public lands. The premise being that you are managing those for somebody. In reality, you're managing those with somebody. And the work that Steve and Gretchen do emphasizes that understanding for young people that life on the planet, you know, if we couldn't grow it or on the planet or mine it from the planet, we couldn't live here. These are all processes that are tied to our productive lives. And it's not just public land forestry that we approach this. It's all forestry professionals. Great Lakes Timber Professionals Association is an association that advances that understanding across the landscape of people who work in forest industry and sustain the economy we all enjoy. With all that background, again, I invite you to take a look at the menu of programs we offered. If you weren't able to enjoy all of them in a live setting, they're there recorded for you, and I hope you'll take time to visit them, and especially that you'll take time to communicate with us on how we can continue to grow and improve in offering the work that we do. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you.